Paleolithic peoples devised shamanism, the religious system in which a practitioner goes into trance, communicates with spirits, and gains information valuable to others. The ritual healing theory, devised by Professor James McClenon, argues that shamanism originated in response to various forms of unusual, often referred to as anomalous, experience occurring in all societies. We can observe this process going on today. A small percentage of people in all societies often perceive apparitions, extrasensory perceptions, out-of-body experiences, and psychokinesis, or paranormal movement of objects. When these people gather to perform rituals, they may perceive unusual events in groups. One such group, called SORRAT, the Society for Research in Rapport and Psychokinesis, has frequently perceived levitating objects and communication with spirits through raps. This film presents a former member of that group. He is interviewed by both independent researchers as well as fellow members of SORRAT, who recollect experiences they share when the group began. Here, this interviewee describes an out-of-body experience, illustrating why people who have frequent experiences believe as they do.
And I was laying down in his bed in the room, and then the next minute I remember it was, it was really strange. But I remember seeing, it was like I was up at the ceiling looking down, and I was looking down at the bed, and I could see myself laying on the bed. Man, it was just weird.
Out of body.
Yeah.
That's what it's generally referred to now.
Yeah. They used to call it an astral projection. I saw myself leaving the room, and I was outside, but I was flying. And flying in the same kind of position, like you think about Superman now, where you're flying and your arms are outstretched and you're looking down.
Like Dr. Nyhart did in his power dream. I was asking questions, what are you seeing? Then I was writing down what you said.
Tom realized that I was going over terrain that was familiar to him, going towards his parents.
Something about an S-curve
farm
in the road.
But I had never been to their home or farm. It was strange. And, of course, in the conversation, Tom said, well, it's hard to tell how legitimate that is, because even though you haven't been to the farm, maybe he was thinking those things, and I was picking up aspects of the farm through his thoughts, rather than me actually flying and really being there and seeing it live. And we tried to be as objective as possible.
About the potatoes, though.
Right.
So the next weekend, Tom said, well, why don't we drive down there and you can meet my folks and see the farm and all of that. Which we did, and it looked pretty familiar.
Did it?
His dad wore the shirt that was in the wash basket. And then in the barn, we went in there, and there weren't, all the potatoes were gone except a few, old ones that were just kind of scattered there.
Turned out my parents had given them to a blind neighbor family.
So
without me knowing it. So
that kind of turned the corner for him, because he said, well, that led some credibility that it wasn't me just reading his mind, because if I was in his mind, it was the full stalls of the potatoes, not just a few scattered in the stalls. It was memorable for me. There were others, but that one probably was. It was a really exhilarating kind of experience.
The famous poet, Professor John G. Nyhart, published the book Black Elk Speaks in 1932 and organized the SORRAT group in 1961 with people from this film, who were then university students. They experimented with paranormal phenomena, especially table levitation. Although many scientists find it difficult to accept claims of the paranormal, people all over the world report similar astonishing events, and these perceptions lead to beliefs in spirits, souls, life after death, and magical abilities, the foundations for shamanism. Here our interviewee describes the process by which the SORRAT phenomenon first developed.
It took a while, but it was kind of like the group kind of started to somehow, I think, just kind of gel. I mean,
The rapport.
yeah, I don't know how, other than saying that there was a rapport that developed among the group. And it was kind of, you could tell once that happened, then it was kind of like, then we started feeling tremors. For lack of any other term, it was almost like as if the molecular structure of the table itself was vibrating, but it really wasn't visible. It wasn't like the table was moving. You could just feel that.
Electrical.
Yeah, I mean, you know what does that sound about right?
That's right.
It was just, I mean, it was, and you could just tell, and that's the way it kind of started. Then we started to get some like slight movement in the tables, and then the raps then became a part of that whole thing. And of course, we didn't know at first about the raps. They were like random kind of noises, and
Yeah.
a lot of times they were around the area of the table, but then other times they'd be in other parts of the room. We used to sit mainly in that living room
Yeah.
area, but then you'd get them out in that kitchen and that dining area. And,
Even outside eventually.
yeah, that's true. Then I can't remember exactly how we started to realize that the raps then became a communication method.
Dr. Neihart knew it.
Yeah.
You'd read about it earlier.
Hmm.
One rap for yes.
Yeah, and then he started
alphabet.
kind of like asking questions about that, like depending on like if we were asking questions, and then he would say, well, you know, like one rap for yes and two for no, and then it was just like a rap for each letter of the alphabet, like one for A and two for B and three for C, four for D. Hopefully it didn't have many words with Z. Questions would be asked, and then you would get answers through the raps back, either by yes or no's to questions or spelling something out. Really, I don't think all of us for sure knew what to make out of the whole thing with the movements and everything, because we were just thinking, well, you know, maybe there's some physiological reaction between the group developing, and then that's somehow acting on the molecular structure of the table, some kind of interaction or something, not really thinking that there was anything maybe early on spiritually connected with it, or even anything that was communicating. I think the communication portion of it was kind of a major breakthrough, because then at that point that made it a whole different ballgame. You were, you know, dealing with some kind of intelligence or entity at that point, which then took it out of just the realm of randomness.
SORRAT group members describe many various events reinforcing their beliefs. John Neihart and others devise complex tests. Often loud rapping sounds were reported to come from the ground, the floors of various people's houses, and even in public places, such as restaurants. Here, a researcher listens to raps with a stethoscope. As the group developed, such paranormal phenomena became more frequent. Neihart would attempt experiments of increasing difficulty as the group gained confidence.
He kind of put the bar up again when instead of getting something coming from the same room, he wanted something to come from another room with the door closed. What was it, a rock? That was in the study, wasn't it?
Is it a box in the desk of his study?
And we were in the living room, and then the rock, I guess, came on the table, right? Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's one thing to say for a book to come from the bookshelf over, and you could say, well, if a table can levitate, then why can't a book off of a bookshelf in the same room levitate and come over to the table, okay? This, though, was a rock in a box in a closed desk drawer. That somehow got out of that box, got out of that closed desk drawer, passed through a closed door, because the door never opened, and came to the table.
And I decided one night with Tom at our apartment to do a table levitation without going through the preamble. Table, will you please levitate? Come on, table, levitate. Well, I didn't have to say anything, and the table went clear up to the ceiling.
Dr. Neihart, like I said, he would, he was usually the one, that would try to set up what he wanted to do that night, But it was kind of funny, because as this kind of developed, sometimes whatever we were dealing with sometimes also had a mind of its own. And even though he wanted it to do a certain thing, sometimes it just, the experiment went off in a completely different direction, and then other times it would be pretty much in line with what he wanted.
As people do all over the world, our interviewee found that he could go into trance, and his trance performances became part of the group's experience. He sometimes gave messages and did spiritual healings while in trance. After conducting many tests, John Neihart came to believe that the spirit of Black Elk, as well as other people, were speaking through our subject. These trance experiences portray how shamanism emerges naturally as a result of anomalous experience.
When you're kind of part of a group, I guess you have to feel comfortable with that as a group. But see, the problem was always for me, is if I went into the trance and I didn't really have an awful lot of recollection of anything while I was under.
Really?
And then when I would come back out of it, of course, he was
I'd take notes,
taking the notes,
or somebody'd have the tape recorder going.
Right, and they had like tape recorders or whatever, and then it was more of them collectively telling me kind of what happened, which in some strange ways I missed out on some of the stuff. Sometimes, though, it got to a point later on when we'd be coming out there, and like we'd walk in the house, and before we even started the experiment, and there'd just be raps starting
like
all over the place. We were like coming in, and everybody was saying hi, and we hadn't even really formally sat down to do anything, and it was kind of like it was this all over the place, and be in the floors and the walls and in the ceiling, and that was kind of enjoyable because I was awake. The forces at work, whatever you want to say they were, they had the capability of being extremely sensitive and gentle, more floating or soothing, or not really harsh, and kind of delicate and light. And then at other times it could just have a just really sense of just absolute awesome sense of power to it.
That would shake sky.
You just have to be in the room to experience it. But the whole room, I mean, it was like the house was shaking in its very foundation. I mean, no, I'm not exaggerating. I mean, it was just unbelievable. Rather than an object in the room vibrating, it was like the whole room, the floor, the walls. I mean, everything was moving.
Earthquake effect.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It felt like, as a matter of fact, I think the first time it did occur, that's what we kind of thought. And I remember we were kind of checking the papers and everything the next day to kind of see whether there was some kind of reported earthquake. It was powerful, but it wasn't frightening. Like you can see some things that are kind of, awesome, and then it's just like, it scares you. But this, it was awesome, and you were kind of awestruck, but it wasn't something that instilled fear in you. But that range of ability to be something very light, or very gentle, all the way to something that could be quite immense or like that was really quite an interesting range.
Our interviewee presents his own explanations for the source of the group's experiences. These narratives illustrate how group experiences led to shamanism.
The thing that I always felt, though, was the key was the special rapport that the group developed. Now, I mean, I can't prove that. I'm just saying that was always, and I think most of us in that small group kind of felt the same way. It was just, I don't know, one of those special things that happens maybe once in a lifetime. I don't know, where certain people or forces come together and just at the right time, in the right place, and why that happens, I don't know, whether it's fate or whatever. You seem to develop or get to a point at some point in this long journey, so to speak, where it gets beyond trying to prove anything anymore. If anybody new came in that had any scientific background about them at all, it was like they were always wanting, because they were the new person on the block, so they were the new skeptic, and you always were going to have to prove something to them. But anybody that had been along the journey with us, after a while you got to a point where you just kind of knew that, you know, well, what else was there to prove? I think the quest later on became more, not so much having to prove it anymore, as it was some kind of spiritual enhancement and development as a group and as people. I think as the group developed, that was more important than really trying to prove it to anybody anymore.
Like the members of the Neihart SORRAT group, Paleolithic humans who perceived frequent anomalous experiences would have gathered together to gain insight from each other to understand their unusual experiences. Patterns within first-hand accounts of unusual experience from all over the world support the argument that ancient people devised shamanic belief systems as a result of the experiences they perceived as individuals and when in groups.